May the words of my mouth and the meditations of our hearts be pleasing to you, O Lord, my rock and my redeemer. Amen. So Lent is a time to listen in the wilderness. Today we hear in our reading that after his baptism, Jesus, full of the Spirit, was led by the Spirit into the wilderness. After being baptized by John in the Jordan, and when Jesus was praying with others, the Spirit descended upon him in bodily form like a dove. And a voice came from the heavens, "You are my Son, the beloved. With you I am well pleased." We heard that reading about the baptism just only a few weeks ago. And this is the context within which our reading today occurs. Jesus just heard about his calling. "You are my Son, the beloved." And he was led by the Spirit into the wilderness to get in touch with his calling, to get in touch with God who is calling him, to get in touch with what it meant for this to be his calling. "You are my Son, the beloved. With you I am well pleased." This is the context in which Jesus is led by the Spirit into the wilderness. The wilderness is often portrayed in Scripture as a place in a time of getting to know God and getting to know oneself. In the Old Testament, we heard about the Israelites who were wandering in the wilderness, wandering for 40 years in the wilderness. Over these 40 years, the Israelites were getting to know God and getting to know themselves. They had to be transformed back into a people, back into the people of Israel. And so God had them wander in the wilderness for 40 years so they could get to know him and they could get to know who they were and what they were called to. In Scripture, the number 40 often refers to a time of transformation. The number 40 is symbolic to tell us that a great transformation is taking place. Now, we just finished up this time of Epiphany, during which we focused on the revelation of who Jesus is, who God is, and who we are. Epiphany, a time of revelation, a time of revealing. And now we can enter this time of Lent, this time in the wilderness, to experience God, to help transform ourselves into who we are called to be. We can enter the wilderness to understand more deeply what was revealed to us over the past weeks of Epiphany, of the revelation revealed to us. And we can come to know God and know ourselves more deeply during this time in the wilderness. And God comes to us in times that we are in the wilderness. In last week's reading of the Transfiguration, we heard God say from the cloud, "Listen to him. Listen to him." And so during this time in the wilderness, we are called to listen to him. To listen to him, to know God more deeply, and to know ourselves more deeply. To get in touch with our calling, just as Jesus went into the wilderness to understand more deeply his own calling. And in the wilderness, we can recognize the gap between where we are and where we are meant to be. We can sit and explore this gap and what it means for us, and we can understand where we are meant to be, understand our calling, if we listen. But encountering and experiencing the wilderness isn't always easy. It can be difficult to find the time to be in the wilderness We can get wrapped up in the craziness and the chaos of our lives and our schedules. It can be difficult to commit to practices or ways that can help us to listen to God. It can be hard to start and stick to a routine of meeting God in the wilderness. Anyone who has tried to start a routine of going to the gym or adhere to a diet, for example, knows how hard it is to start and commit to some practice. It can also be difficult because sometimes we just don't take the need to listen seriously. We are so busy in our lives, so busy with our schedules, so busy with just getting things done. So busy with talking or moving or going here or there that we can forget what it means to listen, what it means to stop, what it means to stop and listen. But what if we could get ourselves to stop, get ourselves to listen? What if we could embrace practices that can help us to listen to God in the wilderness? What if we could listen to God within us? There are practices that can help us explore this wilderness. Spiritual practices to help us to close out the outer chatter of the world, to close out the inner chatter of our hectic lives. Practices that can help place us in the wilderness during which we can listen. That can help to place ourselves simply in the presence of God and to be open and to listen to Him. There is spiritual reading, Lectio Divina, for example, reading Scripture in a way that can help us focus on God and Scripture, to sit with a piece of Scripture, to sit and listen to God. We can listen to a podcast which might have scriptural themes, or podcasts that incorporate music and prayer, like Pray As You Go or Forward by Day, which can help create a space within which we can stop and enter into this wilderness and listen. There are practices of centering prayer, actually a few variations of centering or contemplative prayer, in which we can prayerfully focus on a word, a simple phrase, or an image. Or we can simply prayerfully walk through nature and recognize our connectedness to God within creation. There are several practices where we can create the space for ourselves to enter the wilderness, to listen to God, to simply be with God. It doesn't have to take too much time. We can just start with 10 or 15 minutes. Once established, we can increase to 20 or 30 minutes. And as we get in touch with God in ourselves, as we listen to God around and within us, we can find our connection with God, with creation and with one another. We can begin to understand how we belong to one another, how we are one body together, each with our diverse gifts. We can get in touch with God and in touch with those with who we are meant to be, and get in touch with our calling. And then we may find that we begin to crave these times, that we treasure these moments to sit and listen to God, to simply be present with God. So with our readings today in mind, I invite you to choose a way to place yourself in the wilderness, to place yourself in prayerful listening, to enter the wilderness as Jesus did after his baptism, to enter the wilderness as the Israelites did, by which they came to know their God and to know themselves. Use this Lent as a time to connect with God, with yourself and with one another, through this listening in the wilderness. Make yourself available to be open to God. Make yourself open to listening, to be open to simply being present. And with that, I am sure that there is much to hear in the wilderness if we just listen.